Welcome to this presentation on assessment. I like that picture because it's funny, but some truth in it in some respects that some people feel like professors just throw a dart at the board and that's how I got my grade because I don't understand why I got the grade that I got. Other joke around the old academic world is I give grades based on how many papers the student wrote. Doesn't matter what they wrote. If it's a bigger, longer paper, they get a better grade. I kind of joke around that in the online program, the bigger the file that a student turns in, megabytes or gigabytes, the better grade they get. And I have a grading scale. If it's over 100 gigabytes, they get an A, so forth and so on. It's a joke. I don't do that. So our question for this lecture presentation is how do we evaluate or assess student learning? First, we need to understand what assessment is about. It's just gathering information to make judgments about various things. We make judgments about student learning. Are they learning the information? At least we hope they're learning the information. And it's typically used for grades. Which we'll talk about a little bit later. We use it to get judgment about our own teaching. We also use assessment to determine if we're meeting our course, program, or university learning objectives, our learning goals, program, university learning goals. And then we also use assessment to make program improvements. Some other uses is to provide students on what kind of progress they are making and status that they have in the class or the program. Or if we're talking about an athletic training education program, how are they doing? Hopefully it provides student motivation to improve their performance when they get information back on tests or papers or whatever. Hopefully that will be somewhat motivating to do better or continue the work that they're doing. It also helps us determine how effective our teaching is, if we need to make any course modifications or curriculum program modifications. Now, one of the things that will happen in this grad program is in several classes you'll turn in your signature assignment into a program called Task Stream. I've been asked why we do that. And what Task Stream is, it's an assessment software program that we, the faculty, write the rubrics that we'll talk about later, but we have rubrics for our signature assignments, and then we enter data on your rubrics into Task Stream. And what we're provided, I'm provided as a program director, how well students have satisfied or met the program student learning outcomes in our graduate program, and also how our grad students are meeting the university student learning outcomes. And that's true for every program at our university, and it's pretty common now across the United States at universities to do this. We use this information to make program changes, teaching class, the way we teach our classes, because if we're not meeting a specific student learning outcome, is it because we're not teaching it correctly or we're not emphasizing it enough? Those type of things. So that's what we use those some of the bigger data for. We also use assessment to place students in appropriate instructional groups. Say students are struggling in certain areas, so we can place those students in a course to help them to improve. And obviously we use assessment to provide us objective information for grades. Hopefully it's objective, but we're going to use that information for grades. We got to give grades. Actually, providing grades at the K-12 and college level is pretty new. It's only about 100 years old. Before turn of last century, only the rich and elite went to college. you didn't get grades. You either passed or failed. If you failed, you were kicked out of the university. Again, only the rich were going to college at that time, the elitist. Now that then with the changing of academics and schools and all the stuff that's happening over the last 100 years at the higher education level, grades became more prevalent. I'm going to look for an article that was shared with me about 2 years ago when I was on a committee on our campus going through our accreditation process for the university. We're talking about grading and the history of grading. It's kind of interesting, actually. Other thing you should know with the CATIE accreditation, they require us to use a lot of assessment data to prove that our students are actually being taught the educational competencies and they're meeting those educational competencies. All that information has to be reported to CATIE every single year, and then when programs go through their every 5 to 7 year, sometimes 10-year reaccreditation process, they have to provide all the data on the assessment of student learning. All right, so we have two main types of assessment that's typically used in academic programs. We have formative and summative. Formative assessment is during classes, like the learning activities that I'm formally assessing for you. That's during the class. And the reason why we use that, it helps guide the student on making changes in a class, hopefully help students to improve in what they're doing. So it's forming the student, and it's informing the teachers on what's happening. A summative assessment is typically at the end of a class. It can be a final exam. It can be, and signature assignments is what we've adopted in our grad program. In some respects, our signature assignments are summative for the course, but not summative for the program. Our summative final assessment for our graduate program is the comprehensive examination. That's the final thing. That's what we're using to determine if you're meeting our program student learning outcomes. And a purpose of any summative assessment is to let the teachers and students know the level of accomplishment attained. So how well did they do? We use both formative and summative to provide students grades when we're talking about grading. Another picture here. Sorry, it's kind of a little fuzzy. So we have up and down, we have summative. Something's more summative. And as we go down, we have something that's more formative. Then we also have formal assessment and then informal assessment. So let's give examples of formal and informal. We're doing those in this class. We have the informal, which are the low-risk assignments where I'm not giving you any kind of grade for those. It's for us to just exchange information back and forth. And then the formal grading is the learning activities where I'm actually formally grading your papers, providing you feedback. Most of those are all formative in the class, during different learning activities, and forum post will be formative and formal, but we also have informal, formative, forum post. Well, that's hard to say. But then we have our summative formal assignments, which in our class is the signature choice assignment. So it's basically some of the different types of assessment types that we have. What kind of tools can we do for assessment? I'm using this information from Rink's book again on teaching PE, and some of the stuff from our program I'll bring into this too. So we can use checklist as the picture shows there. You're doing observations, and then you have a list of what they should be doing on a skill, and if they do it, you check it off. So we can do this with athletic training skills, clinical skills, and I'll show example, sort of. It's not really a checklist, it's more of a rubric, but I'll come back to this when we get there. Then on a rating scale, again, we're doing skills again. So we're observing. We can use this in a clinic, we can use in a lab, and then with the observation, we're observing how they did. Like I like the one on the right. It has the elementary gymnastic sequence. Rate each of the following characteristics on a 3-point scale. 1, always; 2, sometimes; 3, never. And then they have the list of the 1, 2, 3, 4 different things. And then you give them that rating there. And saying then they have the one below with the affective concerns. Again, then they have a scale 1, 2, 3, 4, what each one means. Then they have what the things that they're looking for based on what they've been teaching, and then they're demonstrating that skill, and that's how they give a objective grading for observing skills. And we could do this again with athletic training with all our skills. You have to do the work, but it does make grading a lot easier. That's more objective versus subjective with our grading. Another thing is rubrics. We use rubrics quite a bit in the grad program. It's for more complex assessment for skills and cognitive abilities, written work, presentations, and skills. Again, we can use this for clinical skills. Provides the expected behavior or performance that we want from our students. And also provides the students guidelines and the teachers guidelines of what we're trying to do in the class, when they're writing a paper or a presentation, what they should have in the different parts of a paper or a presentation, or for the clinical, the different areas on the clinical. It provides us with what is excellent, average, poor, unacceptable performance. And to me, it makes grading a lot more objective. I mean, I've been using rubrics pretty consistently now for, I'd say, 5 to 6 years. I don't do them on the learning activities, as you know by now, but I do use them for the signature assignments. And this picture is actually from our signature assignment rubrics, just one part of it. We have more than this, but all the signature assignment rubrics will look like this. They're on a 4-point scale, where the criterion, does the student does not meet the criterion, it's the approaching the criterion, meets the criterion, exceeds the criterion. So this particular criterion is for the teaching method description for the signature choice assignment. So we have the description for all 4 categories or criterion. And then I can provide a point value. So that particular part of the assignment's worth 30 points. And then the exceeds criterion is anywhere from the 93 to 100% value. So I can do some math. I can times, say, I think you didn't get 100%, but you're not in the 80 to 92.99%. You're somewhere about a 95 on that. Still subjective, but it's still a lot more objective than previously. And then I can give you some point value on that. So you can read that. Hopefully it'll help you determine how you should write your paper or your presentation, and how I should grade you. It's very subjective. It's objective. Here's a checkoff list. It's also a rubric, and it's the checkoff thing I was talking about earlier. This is for a lab class that I taught. So this is for the lab test for Achilles taping. And so I was out of 25 total points. They would actually do the skill in front of me. I'd watch them. And so if the athletic trainer put the patient in the correct position for for the Achilles taping, they got 5 points. I could just check it off. I knew what I was looking for. I have neatness there. Then I had the pattern, and I would just check each time they did every part on the bullet point And I gave this to the students so they knew what they were being graded on. If they missed something, that's how I give them points. So it's clean, it's simple, and it's good for students to have in front of them. How do we create rubrics? First thing is we need to determine what is excellent performance on the skill or written work or presentation. What are you looking for? Sometimes it's pretty hard to describe. It's better to be more, be very specific on the different areas. Then you want to break down what you're trying to do in a specific criteria. Like I go back here, we have different criterion. If you look at the rubric for the signature choice assignment, you see there's quite a bit different criterions for that assignment. Then what you want to do is determine the level of performance. This is the scaling. You want it on a 4-point scale, a 5-point scale, and you want to determine the point values. Then you need to write specific descriptions for each criteria and each level of performance. What that means is what is the excellent, what is right below excellent. So let's do A, B, C, D, and F. So what's A work, what's B work, what's C work, what's D work, and F work. In our grad program, we have A, B, C, and F. That's basically the 4 levels here at the university. It's exceeding the criteria is A, meeting the criteria is B, approaching the criteria is a C, and did not meet the criterion is an F. Then have that rubric reviewed by the experts. Peers, we have that. We have the person at our school who reviews my rubrics and everybody else's rubrics. Gives us help with that. Have other peers look it over. If you're working in an athletic training education program, you can all work together on this. Then try it out and see if it works. If it doesn't, make some changes to it. Maybe you just need a... I've done it in the middle of a class. I've added words to it because I realized I was needed to assess something and I really wasn't. So I had to make modifications right in the middle of a class. I was required to work, but I just didn't describe it within the rubric. So I added that in the rubric. Other types of assessment is test, examinations. So we have the old written test. And what do we do? What's the purpose of written exam? Is to determine student knowledge. That's the whole point of written exams, is to give you feedback. Did you understand the material? Hopefully in our area in athletic training, we write our exams in such a way that they will also test critical and clinical reasoning skills, because we have to test that. We have to teach that. And we have to test that. We also should match what is taught to the exam should match what is taught in the course, and it also should be for tied back to our student learning outcomes. Now, the question is should our exams be solely just objective, which means, like multiple choice, true and false, fill in the blank? I don't think so. Maybe on some of the lower level courses, but I think they probably need to be much more objective, which would be essay or more clinical type questions where students have to make, use a case study. Based on a case study, they have to write up what they should do for like rehab. If it was a rehab class, they have to actually make a rehab plan for a specific injury, because that's really how we're going to think in the field. We're not going to do multiple choice in the field. Yes, I know on the VOC exam there's multiple choice, so we have to do the objective, but we also have to teach them and test them on subjective information, because that's the real life. Remember, we talked about in the first week in classes have real life, realistic, authentic feedback, and that's one way we do it is through subjective examinations. Other thing that I learned about recently is the choice questions where you allow the student to pick an area that they want to write on. This can come through different ways. I've seen, you probably all have taken exams this way, the essay type exams where teacher will give you 5 different questions to prepare for, and they'll ask 3 of them, or you have 5, and you have the choice of, say there's 3 questions, you have the choice of 2 to answer. So there's many different ways you can give students the autonomy in their examinations, the works on the areas of their strengths. So that goes back to the self-determination theory and strengths. We also have clinical or practical exams in our area, and so we're using these to assess the clinical, the CIPs, the clinical integration proficiencies. These can be objective, like I have on the screen there from the Achilles taping. It's very objective. It's not very much subjective. But should they be subjective? Like I was talking about in the written exams, I would think that they should be. Can be an oral exam where you give them a case study again, and then they have to verbally, orally do the skill in front of you, but talk it through while they're doing the exam. This goes back to what it was like when I took my BLC exam. We had practical exam, and we were always taught when you're doing the practical exam, say what you're doing when you're doing it, so the people who are assessing you understand what you're trying to do. And they can help you, give you feedback, and says, you said this, but this is what you actually did, especially when you're as a student. Plus, it helps you get used to just talking to a patient, because you should tell a patient what you're going to do before you do it and while you're doing it. And again, we need to somehow assess the students' critical and clinical reasoning skills, and that's I believe it's one of the what's the word I'm looking for? It's one of the educational competencies, and it's definitely in the CIPs. Some other assessment types, observations. We do this all the time in athletic training. We observe the students doing the work. We'll ask them to go do the assessment while we observe them, and then we give them feedback on that. Some other unique ones is journals. We can ask students to journal about their experiences on a weekly basis. Very loose on how we're going to assess that. It can be just on that, did they actually do it? It needs to be specific on this. This is a whole nother teaching method. Portfolios. I think that's another good way to build a portfolio in our practicum and athletic training class. We actually have you develop a professional portfolio. Some of you have already done that. Some of you will do that. I think it's a good way to build professionalism, but also to see growth through a program, especially if you have students in a program for 2 or 3, 4 years. You can see the growth there. Projects. We should be doing projects. These can be written. These can be individual. They can be group projects. And then we can have peer assessment. We can have peers assess one another with peer assisted learning. So there's more ways to skin a cat than just giving written exams. Be more creative than just giving written exams. Finally, we need to give both assessment and feedback. Both of them are required, they are needed, they're helpful to help students learn. We also need to provide students with clear expectations and what students will be assessed on. What are we giving them grades on? This needs to be clearly described in the syllabus, and I'll be talking about the syllabus soon and how we write a syllabus. Hope this has been helpful for you to understand how to assess student learning.